Good evening, and welcome to the most exciting show that is going to be on the internet tonight. Why is this show so exciting? Because this is the show where we are going to finally put to rest the question, can we as a nation provide health care for every American? And as promised on Monday's episode, I'm going to show how we have already been successful in applying the shared percentage rule in this country. So I'm not going to waste your time or delay this any longer. We're just going to jump right into it. Currently, approximately 1% of all Americans are serving in the active duty military, with 7.6% of all Americans on veteran status. And that's any American who has served just one term or all the way up to a 35-year retirement. And according to taxpolicycenter.org, 44% of all households in this country don't even pay federal income tax. Forbes has this figure at around 47%, but I'm going to use the .org values for this episode. This means that 56% of all Americans pay to support 100% of the medical care for 8.6% of its citizens. Well, sort of. We veterans do pay reduced rates for our healthcare premiums through federal subsidies. And that savings is at about 98% of what the average American household pays. And I want you to remember that percentage. We'll be coming back to that later in the episode. If you're angry right now at those numbers, you should be. But don't be angry at service members or veterans. Be angry at our politicians and our leaders. This is the first evidence that they've been robbing from us. But we need to cut them a little bit of slack, because I don't think most of them do this willfully. I do believe that they have been doing it basically out of ignorance. They just don't know any other way to solve this problem. That's why it was so important for us to discuss the history of healthcare to provide us some context so we can shape the problem correctly and arrive at the right solution. So in this example I just provided, is this the most efficient means of diffusing our resources across that concentration gradient? Not at all. But it does provide the proof of concept for my recommended healthcare plan. And it also demonstrates this by showing the relationship between the end user, that individual that's seeking the medical treatment, the insurance provider, the medical care facility, and the federal government. All these entities represent the concentration gradient. Now we just need to effectively divide the needs and the resources. In order to show how this is going to be done, I'm just going to go through the actual worksheet I used to do the math. But before I show you that, I want to show you the proposed legislation and walk you through those recommendations. I put a link to the draft bill in the description below. Along with the bill is the worksheet I used to solve the equations that determine my conclusions. So let's get started. We'll begin with the purpose of the bill itself. The title itself is a summary of the overall purpose of this bill. The Affordable Health Care Premium Act seeks to enact legislation that will provide the funds to reduce the cost of household medical care insurance premiums. This is not a free health care for all system. This system relies on the shared percentage rule. This means it will also require that every employer provide health care to every employee, whether they are full-time or a part-time worker. This will be accomplished through a 6-year tax cycle, which will begin with a stimulus tax on personal wealth of $2.5 million or more and at a rate of 15%. And it will be assessed once every 6 years. There will also be 2 usage taxes collected quarterly throughout the fiscal year. These taxes will be on the consumption of automobile gasoline, as well as a tax on the use of the cellular network. The tax rate for both of these services will be at a rate of 2 cents for every dollar spent. I know we Americans hate the sound of hearing we're going to be taxed even more than we already are, but this tax will actually result in a 98% decrease in spending for the exact same services these funds will be paying for. And the services these funds will be providing support for are listed as follows. Any and all cancer treatments. That means if you had cancer last year and this bill was already the law, you would have had no out-of-pocket expenses for your treatment from the time that you were diagnosed to the time it was determined that you were in remission. Second, all treatments for any autoimmune diseases. And third, any emergency care procedures. This would include ambulatory transportation, whether by ground or air, as well as any life-saving measures performed in the emergency room. Once the patient is stabilized and moved to an intensive care unit, then the private insurance would pick up the remaining costs. The selection of these three treatments were based on the fact that no one asked to get cancer. No one has any control whether or not they get an autoimmune disease. And while there are many factors that can prevent the need for the use of emergency response care, for example, being a better driver by not texting and helping reduce the risk of accidents, or by not living a high-risk lifestyle such as rock climbing or skydiving, which increases the possibility of injury or death. The fact remains that when a human life is in need of life-saving measures, they should not be worried about how much it's going to cost to save their life. They're a person in our community. And to be part of that helping the person recover should be the desire of every American. And as for us Christians, we believe that all people are fearfully and wonderfully made. We need to take great care to care for those whom God has created. So how do we protect these procedures and ensure that they're executed with the American people in mind? Well, the first protection we need to establish is that Congress can in no way exempt themselves from this law. If Congress wants to lead, then we are going to make them lead by example. There has been too many historical examples where Congress has enacted a law only to keep themselves from having to participate in it. Our lawmakers need to subject themselves to the authorities of the same laws we all have to. The second protection is that Congress would be prohibited from borrowing money allocated from the above-mentioned procedures for any reason whatsoever. Congress would also need to establish the fixed costs for these procedures, and these fixed costs would be based on the current average costs for these procedures in the regions they are performed. For example, healthcare in Wyoming is cheaper than healthcare in New York City. So again, the shared cost will not be equitable by dollar amount, but will be by percentage of the cost of living in that region. Absolutely no earmarks of any kind for any other procedure or any other taxes will accompany this bill. Corporations, limited liability companies, and small businesses will be exempt from the usage taxes. This is because they'll be required to provide every employee that they hire with healthcare insurance. That is the shared portion of those resources. Companies based overseas who have employees working in any of the states, as well as any U.S. territories, will be required to provide health care through a U.S.-based provider to all their employees as well. These are the protections that must be enacted with the law to ensure the efficiency and effectiveness of this law. If you look at the proposed bill I posted in the link, you'll see a few more protections that I added. These are good idea protections, but would not be required to ensure the success of the bill. So there's the proposed legislation on how to make medical care, our medical care system, more efficient here in America. Anderson Cooper once asked Representative Ocasio-Cortez in regards to the Green New Deal, how are we going to pay for it? Well, Anderson, I'm going to show you and the American people just how this works out mathematically. The values that you see here represent the needs and the resources that we'll be working with. I also added the references where I obtained these values. I can't state this more clearly, and I need to say it now. These are real-world values. These are not hypothetical. We are going to be talking about real money and real needs. The dollar amounts and percentages are the real resources that we have at our disposal, as well as what we as Americans have actually been spending on insurance premiums and medical care costs for very specific treatments. And these are the values we'll be working with throughout all of the solutions. So let's jump down to the execute portion of the worksheet. And I'm going to be reading from the plan section, but what you're going to see up on screen are the equations from the execution portion. I know this is going to start out making most of us cringe because we don't like talking about paying taxes, but I want to remind you that the upfront tax is going to result in an annual savings you're absolutely just not going to believe. And at this point, I'm going to remind you, you need to keep in mind that 98% savings that we spoke of earlier in the back of your mind. We are going to start with identifying our resources first by calculating the amount of tax revenue gained from the stimulus packages as well as the usage taxes. First, the stimulus tax. We begin by multiplying the mean representation of billionaires by $2.5 million to get the total amount of taxable wealth from the billionaires. And that equals $1,450 million. Then we take that product and multiply it by 15% to get the total tax revenue earned from billionaires, which equals $217,500,000. And now we account for the millionaires. We do this by multiplying the total number of millionaires by 2.5 million to get the total amount of their taxable wealth, which comes out to 20,750,000,000,000 of total taxable wealth. Now we multiply that by 15% and we get $3,112,500,000 in total tax revenue from the millionaires. Yep, you read that right. More than $3 trillion earned just from the millionaires alone. Now we add the products of those two equations together to get the total amount of funding from the stimulus tax to fund these catastrophic health care procedures, and then we end up with $3,112,717,500,000 in total revenue earned. All that to save human life. These numbers are staggering. And what is even more surprising is the tax under this example is taxed every 4 years and only taxed against $2.5 million of personal wealth. This isn't even their total individual wealth. So for billionaires, we're not even taxing them at billionaire rates. We're taxing them only on the 2.5 million portion of their personal wealth. And even with that, look at how much money is available just by leaving the corners of their proverbial fields as God has commanded. We are already starting to see how God established this natural law, and it can be validated through the language of the universe, which is math. All right, let's continue by now looking at the general population and those usage taxes. According to PewResearch.org, 317.3 million Americans use cell phones. USMobile.com states that the average cell phone bill is $804 per year. So we multiply those two numbers together to get the total amount of taxable revenue from cell phone usage. And that is $266,532,000,000. We multiply that by the 2-cent tax and we get $5,330,640,000 from the cell phones alone. That's a lot of money. And it seems like we as taxpayers are out of pocket a whole heck of a lot. But bear with me. I promise you, because we're applying the shared percentage rule, each individual citizen is not spending as much as it seems. So let's move on to the gas tax. According to the EIA, there are 142,710,000,000 gallons of gas sold in America annually. We multiply that number by the average cost of gallons of gas, which is $2.05, and we get a total of $292,555,500,000 of total taxable wealth from the purchase of gas. We multiply that result with a 2% tax rate, and we get a total of $5,851,110,000 of total tax revenue earned just from the gas tax. And again, we add those totals together, and we get $11,181,750,000 in total revenue earned from the general population through these usage taxes. I told you in the first episode this would not be equitable by dollar amount or percentage, but these two numbers demonstrate what these two numbers do demonstrate is how each demographic can be taxed at a percentage without exhausting their economic potential. Now we add the total from the stimulus package and the total from the usage taxes, and we get a grand total revenue of $3,123,899,250,000. Man, that is a mouthful. Now, I've already mentioned the three treatment coverages that would be supported by this bill. To show the true potential of this funding, I'm only going to use one of those categories for the next equation. According to asbestos.com, the average annual cost for all cancer treatments in the U.S. was $150.8 billion. Now let's subtract those costs from the total revenue earned. Now how much money is still available? $2,973,099,250,000. Now, just to bring these values into perspective, let's divide the remaining funds by the annual cost of cancer treatments to see how many years we could cover these costs for. Do you see that number that's on the screen? Do you see what it says? And no, you're not misreading that. That says 19.7 years. Now, keep in mind, these values are based on a 4-year tax cycle at a rate of 15% of only $2.5 million of personal wealth. My proposed bill has a 6-year cycle at 15% of total personal wealth. You're already starting to see the potential of this bill. These are the results when we conduct ourselves in accordance with the laws God has established in nature. This is not a joke, and it's certainly no gimmick either. This is real, observable, repeatable, and measurable science. Now that we have validated its potential, we need to get to what all Americans are really concerned with anyhow. How is it going to save us money in the long run? Well, let's say an insurance provider pays $8.8 million annually for cancer treatment. Then they also pay $8 million for their treatment of autoimmune diseases. And then they spend another $2.5 million for emergency care treatments annually. Their total annual cost for these services would be $19,300,000. Now we take the total number of people who are members of that insurance company. For this exercise, we'll say it's 110,000 people that are covered by this particular insurance company. We divide the total number of people by that $19,300,000, and we end up with $175.45 of monthly savings. Now, according to eHealthInsurance.com, the average monthly premium per household is $804. Subtract the savings from the previous equation, and you get your new monthly premium. Now, that doesn't seem like a whole lot of money at first, but now let's look at the annual savings. Multiply that $175 by 12 months, and we get an annual savings of $2,105.40. Now, let's compare those savings to what we would be paying if this bill were already law. According to Fool.com, the average driver purchases 656 gallons of gas annually. We multiply that number by the average cost per gallon, and we get $1,344.80. Now we take that value and multiply it by the 2-cent tax, and we get $26.89. Now, according to USMobile.com, the average annual individual cell phone bill is $840. Let's multiply that cost by the 2-cent tax as well, and we get $16.80 spent in taxes. Let's add those two sums together to see what the total in taxes each individual American would be spending to cover catastrophic healthcare procedures if this bill were law of the land today. A grand total of $43.69. Compare that to the $2,105 discovered earlier for the exact same care, and we end up with a savings of 98%. Does that number sound familiar? That is the number I asked you to remember twice during this episode. I wasn't joking with you, America, when I said we had the potential to save as much as 98% on procedures that we were relying on our medical insurance providers to cover the cost of. It is taking those funds and diffusing them in this manner that allows for these savings. These savings are then further shared along the concentration gradient by lowering healthcare premiums. The result? Every employer can now afford to place every employee under the employer-sponsored healthcare system. I said this from the beginning. We already had a successful system in place. It just wasn't being used efficiently. Now there's no more excuses. We've been given the answer. And remember, the examples that we saw in these equations were based on the least amount of taxes against the fewest medical treatments. That's why my recommendation is for a 6-year tax cycle. This allows for greater revenue while also allowing those being taxed the opportunity to recoup their earnings. Just like the farmers that had to leave their corners, they had to regrow their crops every year. No person is without excuse. If you're a Christian, I've provided you a biblical example. If you reject the Bible, I've also provided a scientific explanation backed by mathematics. So what is the next step? What do we do with all this new information? Well, we contact our representatives and share the proposed legislation as well as those worksheets. I posted a link to the website where you can search by state for your representative. You'll need to know your zip code as well as the 4-digit district code. If you don't know your 4-digit district code, I posted a link to the post office website where you can run a search to find it. Once you have the zip code +4 and you found your representative, hit the contact button for their email page to pop up. This is where things might differ from page to page. Representatives have a block from people viewing their information who are not members from their district. For Roger Williams, my representative, he doesn't allow his constituents to send him attachments with their emails. So I copied and pasted the contents of the proposal, not the worksheet, into the body of the email. When I receive a response, I'll then send all the documents as one attachment in my reply. And what I want more than anything else is to wake up on Monday morning and hear on the news how every representative received an email from their constituents telling them about this proposed legislation and how we want our medical care system here to be financed. Please share this video with your friends and family. Americans deserve to know there's a better way to fund medical care in this country. And let me know what your response is to this proposal by leaving your thoughts in the comment section below. If you write it, I'll read it. And if problem solving is what you want for America, please hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon to be alerted when we post new content on this channel. And thank you as always for watching, and God bless.